Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this year's Policy Forum on Identity, Authentication, and the Road Ahead. I'm Jeremy Grant. I'll be your MC for the next 2 days. I'm a managing director in Venable's cybersecurity and privacy practice. I also serve as coordinator of the Better Identity Coalition and an advisor to the FIDO Alliance. I'm thrilled that once again, both of these groups are able to partner with the ID Theft Resource Center on what has become the best event each year, looking at a range of policy issues around identity and authentication. I'm a little less thrilled we're doing this once again as a virtual conference. When we first announced things in December, we were hoping it could be a hybrid event with some in-person and virtual components, but Omicron has not been our friend here. The good news, though, is that making this virtual allows for a lot more people to participate. We've got more than 800 people registered today. As we look at the policy landscape in 2022, COVID is continuing to significantly impact the identity and authentication landscape, and not in particularly great ways. We're now coming up on the 2-year anniversary of a global pandemic that has fundamentally changed how we work, shop, learn, apply for government services, with the biggest impact being that for a long time, in-person transactions became impossible, and we're still not quite back to what once was. And much as the way that we do business has rapidly shifted to digital channels, the way that criminals and fraudsters and other adversaries are attacking us, that's moved to the digital channel as well, with a particular focus on exploiting weaknesses in digital identity infrastructure to launch attacks. Back in 2019, CISA declared identity was what they called a national critical function, defined as those functions of government in the private sector so vital to the US that their disruption, corruption, or dysfunction would have a debilitating effect on the security, national economic security, national public health or safety, or any combination thereof. And I don't think anything has brought that point home, that identity really is a national critical function, quite as efficiently as this pandemic. It's clear that without some significant policy changes and a way for government to start giving new tools to people to protect themselves, our digital identity infrastructure is going to continue to be deficient. I think that's a key point we want to drive home over these next 2 days. The government has a meaningful role to play in addressing these issues, not just because of the role of inadequate digital identity infrastructure, enabling adversaries to steal money and data, but also because of the impact that these attacks have on individuals. In 2020, nearly half of all Americans were victims of financial identity theft. Losses from identity theft increased 42%. The Federal Trade Commission reported identity theft tied just to government benefits skyrocketed by nearly 3,000% in 2020. And for those in the margins of society, the poor, many people of color, those living with disabilities, the inadequacies of our digital identity systems have in many cases exacerbated existing inequities. We can do better. So this event's been unique in that the 3 organizations that partner to jointly produce it have focused on trying to tell as many different aspects of this story, not just talking about security and fraud, but also highlighting how it actually impacts people from all different walks of life and how the solutions that work for some people may not work for others. Identity is really complicated. There's a lot of different facets to the issue. There might not be easy answers to all of them. We hope to shine a light on as many of these topics as we can here the next 2 days. So let me just give you an overview of what to expect. In terms of logistics, this event's being simulcast live, both on the Zoom platform and on a YouTube channel. Everything's being recorded. It'll be archived on YouTube shortly after the event. We have a chat function open. We also have a Q&A tab that if you want to submit a question for a speaker, I can't promise everybody will get to it given that we've got a tight schedule, but it'll at least be there for the session moderators to look at. So today we're going to hear from James Lee from the ID Theft Resource Center shortly after an opening keynote. And James is going to talk about the new ITRC annual data breach report, which will provide some excellent, though kind of depressing statistics and data as to the scope of the problem, not just in government, but across the country. From there, we'll be turning to discussions on what we can do to address some of these problems to make things better. Tanya Riley will moderate a panel that dives deeper into the identity challenges associated with pandemic unemployment benefits. There, we're going to hear from leaders from the Department of Labor, a vendor who's helped states with identity vetting, as well as those who have been advocates for some of the beneficiaries and helped them when state ID verification programs didn't work as well as everybody hoped they would have. We'll then take a 15-minute break. You can get a bite to eat, take a break from the screen. Starting at 1 o'clock Eastern, I will moderate a panel looking specifically at what government can do to help here. We'll have representatives from federal agencies like GSA and TSA, as well as from Congress, all talking about the ways government can play a bigger role in addressing critical identity challenges. We'll follow that with a panel looking at the topic of identity, the individual, and inclusion. diving into when some of our systems fall down for our fellow Americans and what we need to do as government and industry to address those issues. I think a point I'd make here is, as somebody who's historically come at identity from more of a security mindset, I was for many years not paying much attention to the fact that when we focus just on security aspects when designing these types of systems, it can create some real hardships for people. And I think as we become more dependent on digital identity systems, the challenges that these solutions might create can be pretty notable. It's time to talk about that more. It's time to look for ways that we can do better. Let me just give you a quick preview as well of tomorrow. The morning's largely going to focus on authentication. The afternoon will focus on next generation digital ID proofing. We'll start with a keynote from Eric Mill, who's part of the White House Office of Management and Budget. He'll be discussing the government's new zero trust strategy and the role that strong phishing resistant authentication like FIDO plays in it. Then we'll hear from Andrew Shikiar, who runs the FIDO Alliance, who will provide some perspectives from the industry side. We'll then have a panel on how government and industry are rethinking authentication, hosted by the government's former CISO, Grant Schneider. The afternoon's going to shift to a panel looking at next generation digital identity proofing, including a spotlight session with the FDIC's Chief Innovation Officer and the lead for digital ID at FinCEN, talking about their newly announced tech sprint on measuring the effectiveness of digital identity proofing. And then we'll have a closing keynote from Elizabeth Rosenberg, who was just confirmed last month as the Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes at the Treasury Department.